And we're just waiting a few seconds for Facebook to pick up the stream. And welcome to NerdCurl. My name's Dan,
I'm Phil.
and welcome to our first experiment in trying to do live video. It's something that's all catching on, and unfortunately, all of you can see what we really look like.
Sorry.
But hey, we gotta do what we gotta do, because otherwise, Mark Zuckerberg's gonna come and kick our butt.
I'd like to see him try.
And welcome to NerdCurl. My name's Dan.
I'm Phil.
All right, so hopefully that didn't plop in there, but hey, it's all good. So, Phil, it's been an interesting end to the season and start to the season. You want to give us a little bit about what's going on in the curling world?
Well, yeah, since you last joined us, which was probably, if memory serves, uh, last episode, well, actually, we just did an episode recently. Sorry, I've been busy lately. But, yeah, so, following the end of the last season, um, we had the World Curling Federation in conjunction with uh, athletes and equipment manufacturers and scientists conducted a sweeping summit in Ottawa back towards the end of May. And the goal of this was to take all the brouhaha, as it were, from the last season and try and scientifically quantify just exactly what the hell is going on and come up with some sort of rules or guidelines to best curb it. Basically, figure out, just what exactly is going on with the directional sweeping, carving, and all that, and what could be done about it that's realistic in terms of rules, guidelines, that sort of thing. So that got wrapped up, and somewhat surprisingly, they released preliminary results just a couple weeks ago at the end of June. And they did that in order to allow manufacturers, teams, and whatnot to get ready for the upcoming season, which is starting just in August with some of the World Curling Tour events, which, has an impact on the World Curling Federation events, which are the big ones, European Championships, World Championships, that sort of thing. I say surprisingly because initially, when they announced the sweeping summit, they had said a thing about results not being released till September, and of course, by that point, manufacturers aren't going to have time to get product to market or even just to their sponsored teams or top level players or whatever. It's going to really, it would just be putting everyone at a disadvantage for adapting. So there's still more information to come out, at least the actual science, apparently. But for now, they've come out with their preliminary findings, recommendations, and how things are going to go forward regarding this for the upcoming season. Dan?
Hey, look, I'm off mute again. Like I said, it's live. You never know what's going to happen. But as I was saying, and you guys were reading my lips if you're watching the live video, we're going to go to the World Curling Federation website, which just popped up on your screen if we're all doing this correctly. So this dates back to June 27th, and we're talking a little bit about the World Curling Federation Sweeping Summit was held between the 23rd and 26th of May at the North Grenville Curling Club in Kemptville, Ontario, near Ottawa, Canada. So we're going to kind of just go a little bit over the objectives, and we're going to kind of bounce back and forth, kind of giving you our little bit of a breakdown here. So the objectives of the Sweeping Summit were to determine which existing combination of materials, construction, and design allowed sweepers to have a directional influence on a swept curling stone. Determine which combination of materials, construction, and design, enforceable sweeping techniques, or both, eliminate or significantly reduce the ability for a curling broom to have directional influence on a swept curling stone, and recommend applicable standards for sweeping equipment and rules for sweeping to the WCF General Assembly. So that means, Phil, what were they trying to do in simple terms?
Well, it's just like I said. Basically, they were trying to figure out, what exactly was causing directional sweeping to be effective and what you could do about it, and focusing specifically more so on equipment, just because it seemed to be the consensus going into that while technique was playing a factor, equipment was a huge factor, and more so a more realistic way, I guess, to address or enforce the problem. That equipment standards would be easier to put in place and enforce than trying to police sweeping technique. Again, the purpose of the summit was to determine that, but they seem to have that. I don't know if I'd call it so much of a bias, but definitely that, I guess you could say, like, focus going into the event. That, um, let's look at what's doing this, but let's make sure to pay special attention to equipment, and determine if equipment is part of the problem and what we can do about it. Um, Again, they acknowledge, and we'll get to it later with their results, but they acknowledge that technique plays a factor. But it seems like even going into this, with what they said beforehand and everything, that they weren't really looking to necessarily come up with ways to police just technique or focus on technique, unless the results of the summit showed them that technique was everything and materials didn't matter. And as you'll see, that wasn't really the case. Dan?
Are you saying that a good craftsman really shouldn't blame his tools?
I don't know if I'm necessarily saying that. Um, I think the general consensus, and this is, I say, a general consensus, and this is purely unscientific, just based on conversations with people in person, online, and otherwise. I think a lot of people felt that technique was a huge part of this in the last season, and really wanted to see, um, maybe a switch back to people not corner sweeping as much and using two sweepers. But the genie's out of the bottle on this one, and it's really, really hard to police technique. So I understand where they're coming from with this, which is that trying to curb the problem, it's better to focus on one aspect that's easier to control than trying to control something that is. I mean, it could become a very, very subjective mess with on ice officials and whatnot if they were trying to police technique. So, I mean, this is a case where you can, to some extent, blame the tools, or really, if you control what's being used, you can limit the effectiveness of the technique.
So the World Curling Federation actually held a survey to kind of figure out a little bit about what should be looked at during this summit. We're going to flip over to the web screen here, so those of you who want to read along, you can, if you can actually read that small text. The Sweeping Summit objectives took into account feedback from almost 5,000 responses to the World Curling Federation Sweeping Survey about what influence brushing should be allowed to have on a swept curling stone. The outcomes from the survey clearly identified that the delivery should be the most important aspect of a curling shot. Sweeping should never be allowed to slow down a stone or make a stone fall back against a curl, and sweeping should only have a marginal ability to directionally impact a stone. Phil, let's talk a little bit about the results of the survey and what kind of what the overall goal was.
Well, I think with the survey, their goal was just to get feedback from the curling community in general, whether they be curlers who participate at any level down to just fans of the sport. I mean, it was basically open to anybody. And I don't think it was necessarily anything that was going to be binding. I mean, I think if 50,000 people had responded and said, "We love directional sweeping," that might not have changed anything, to be perfectly honest, in terms of how they were going to proceed with the summit. I think it was. I'm glad they did this. I'm glad they got the public opinion And I think it just shows that, like I was saying, that a lot of people just it just shows that the general public opinion seemed to be that the directional sweeping and being able to really affect the curl of a stone with sweeping and pretty much do the opposite of what was accepted for sweeping, which is essentially to make a stone either go straighter or further. Um, this past season wasn't really well liked by a lot of the curling public. And the athletes themselves said repeatedly, "Oh, we don't like this, but it's the reality of the game, yada, yada, yada." But even at that level, the people it was directly affecting said they didn't like it so much and they wanted to see it go away. So really, I think the survey was just a way to kind of confirm what everybody already knew in terms of the opinion regarding the matter, and as a way to include um, the public and get their feedback.
So let's talk a little bit about the initial findings. The Sweeping Summit tested almost 50 brush models supplied by 6 equipment manufacturers. And for those of you watching the live broadcast, you saw my dog walk through the screen. I don't know if Phil, we can't actually have you see that. But anyway, the Sweeping Summit actually came to a conclusion that the best sweeping broom that you can use is the Libman. It's a beautiful thing. You can actually pick it up at your local grocery store. Uh, Solid works pretty well. Not so much.
Dan is always trying to get us additional sponsorships.
Hey, and with video, hey, at least our current sponsor isn't making fun of us for being late on this podcast here. But back to the survey. The Sweeping Summit tested about 50 brush models supplied by 6 equipment manufacturers, both in their original forms and with alternate combinations of fabrics and construction.
So, just a side note I want to add, I just realized there. So, I assume what they mean basically is they're talking about, you know, using a gold line carbon fiber brush with their standard head and a Norway pad, and say a hardline ice pad with an ice pad. But then, I'm guessing using, like, say, a gold line brush with a hard line head, or a hard line brush with a gold line head, or
Dogs and
putting.
cats living together, mass hysteria.
Yes, yeah. So it sounds like they were, mixing and matching heads and pads, and that's something that I've read through this a couple times. I never noticed that till now. I knew they tested different pads and whatnot, but I didn't realize that they tested combinations of different pads and head construction on different shafts.
And back to the website. These new concepts were provided by manufacturers with the aim of determining sweeping devices which produce little or no directional influence. Can you summarize that for us, Phil?
It's basically just what it said. They were just trying to see which combinations and which products had little to no impact with directional sweeping.
Little to none. So that makes a lot of headaches for not much of a result here, apparently. But let's continue. The public debate, which occurred last season, included a suggestion that the unusual impacts of sweeping being observed were caused by a particular sweeping technique, and if sweepers were made to sweep at 90 degrees fully across the face of the stone, the undesirable effects would cease to be an issue. Although the full data from the sweeping summit is still being correlated by the NRC, it was quickly determined that a certain combination of materials and constructions proved to be far too effective in the hands of top sweepers of either gender. Phil, you want to throw in your two
Well,
cents?
to add that next part, testing confirmed that regardless of the technique, even with sweeping at 90 degrees, certain brushes had the ability to manipulate the stone in ways that ran counter to the views expressed in the survey, including slowing it down. So essentially, what they're saying is that they understand that public, like I said, public opinion uh, seemed to be a lot of let's worry about the technique, and let's police technique. That has a big impact on this. Um, and people felt that if curlers were restricted to just sweeping across the face of a stone at 90 degrees, as it were, as opposed to directional sweeping in corners or whatnot, that it would minimize directional influence, even with fabrics that prove to be the most effective at directional sweeping. And what they're saying is what they found was even with curlers, men, women, didn't matter, uh, sweeping at 90 degrees, they were still able to exert directional influence with material. So essentially, what they're saying is yes, technique does play a part, but even with refined technique, material still makes an impact. So,
And what we're going to do is take a quick break. We will be right back to you. Hopefully, this works. It's live. Phil, you don't know, so we're going to hold on for 30 seconds and let's see if this works.
Cheaters, the days of troublesome scaling, cutting, and gutting are over, because Super Bass-O-Matic 76 is the tool that lets you use the whole bass with no fish waste without scaling, cutting, or gutting. Here's how it works. Catch a bass, remove the hook, and drop the bass. That's the whole bass into the Super Bass-O-Matic 76. Now adjust the control dial so that that bass is blended just the way you like it.
All right, we are back. I don't know if that was even worth it, but hey, it's all about trying different things. But let's actually give a shout out to our current sponsor, curlinghats.com. There's no better way to come out to our different curling events that are going to be coming up. You want your curling hat now, you want it to fit really good, whether you have hair on your head or you don't,
what are you trying to say, Dan?
that you should buy a curling hat. Let's take a look at their website real quick because we are good at product placement. So there it is. If you're watching the live video on Facebook, you can see that curling hat. Uh, if I could whistle, I'd whistle right now. Can you whistle? That's good because I really don't want to spit all over the screen. So curlinghats.com. Phil, can you tell a little bit about the promo code?
Yeah, go ahead and use the promo code NERD at checkout to save, I believe it's still $5 off a curling hat.
And if you have any questions, feel free to tweet curlinghats.com because we like them. You should too. All right, so let's go back to the show. We're going to talk about recommendations. Are you excited? I don't know if I'm excited, even though it's been a few months, month and a half since this has been out. He's giving me the dirty look on the screen.
I keep forgetting that I'm on camera. Usually when we're recording the podcast, Dan can't see my face. I mean, at any time, to be perfectly honest, it's funny as a side note. At the end of this last season, I was almost burned out a little bit, and the sweeping had a little bit to do with it. I mean, it really did. And I know, and I get it. What players were saying that there was, they had to do what they had to do, and I don't fault them for it. But I mean, let's be honest. It was, and we can't edit this, so effing, it was effing ridiculous at times. Again, I get it. It worked. They were doing what they had to do. But come on, the merry-go-round of brushes. No one can tell me that they actually enjoyed watching players between shots passing freaking brushes around so they'd have a fresh head to carve with, or players sitting there watching their opponents make a shot and trying to determine if their opponents had used up their brush heads or not. And again, like I said, I can't say it enough. I get it. It was what it was. Players had to do that to stay competitive and not lose that advantage, and they were all doing it within the rules. That's fine. That's all well and good. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it was, just so annoying at times to see. I mean, there's no law against me wearing a Speedo, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good idea or that it's going to look good. You know what I mean? So, a horrible analogy aside, get some eye bleach for,
Yeah, I
get some eye bleach for yourselves. But you know what I'm getting at there is just that with that, like watching men's worlds, is just like, okay, this is just what are we gonna do here? Because this is just getting out of control. I mean, players are following the rules and whatnot, and I understand they got to be competitive, but it just was just so frustrating to watch at times. Where it seemed like the bigger concern was on who has the freshest brush head to be able to carve a shot and sweep it for curl, than for is the shooter going to make their freaking shot.
Just say it. You can just easily say that it was unbelievably.
Got a little background music there, but yeah, it was just
Yeah, I can't believe how I didn't want to swear all that much like that, but hey, you know, God bless YouTube and the technical difficulties pre-roll.
yeah, but you know, with everything, it was just, and I know they tried some stuff out at the last couple slams, or at least the Players Championship for sure. To be honest, I didn't get a chance to watch much of the Players or the Champions Cup. I had just started my new job right then, so things were kind of hectic. I started the Monday after Men's Worlds ended, but I know they had some rules in place in regards to switching up rushes and whatnot. So already, the slams having that ability to make those changes in the fly, they were doing that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, so I guess what I'm getting at is that I'm glad to see something being done, just because hopefully I'll say I'm looking forward to this curling season now. Whereas honestly, at the end of last season, I was kind of just glad it was over and needed a break as a fan, not just as a proto would be journalist or commentator, but just as a fan. I was like, okay, good. We won't have to see this for a while, because obviously I'm still a fan. I still want to watch it, but at times it was honestly almost painful to watch.
And we definitely want to give a shout out to our current viewers that are tuning in on Facebook Live. For those of you who are listening to the audio podcast, make sure to check us out, facebook.com/nerdcurl. We'll talk a little bit more about the live stuff here a little bit later, but let's go back to the sweeping summit. So, the sweeping summit recommendations. Following the conclusion of the sweeping summit, the participating athletes made the following unanimous recommendations to a joint meeting of the WCF Competition and Rules Committee. Blah, 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 blah. Only WCF approved sweeping equipment should be allowed for use at WCF championship events. Phil, let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And I think this is something that when everything broke back last fall, people realized right off the bat that the ball had been dropped by various parties um, on this. That there already should have been equipment standards in place, and there really weren't any. There's a little bit of rules, basically something to the effect of like you can't explicitly damage the ice, but other than that, I mean, it damaged the ice surface to a certain extent, because obviously any sweeping is going to feed, you could call it damage. I mean, you're affecting the pebble, you're wearing it down. But that's all semantics. Point is, they really didn't have any kind of solid equipment standards in place. So this is something that they should have had in place already. So that just makes perfect sense. I mean, you have it in other sports. So
Yeah, so our next thing is point number 2. A single fabric from a single source should be used on all brushes approved for use at WCF Championship and events. The preferred fabric identified at the Sweeping Summit are the green scrub pads from 3M, which you can see right here on our screen.
yes, and the ones without the soap inside of them, because they don't want that getting on the ice. They want just the abrasive material.
Of course, because abrasiveness is the best way. I got nothing. This is what happens when we go live. All right. Number 3, the brush head construction should include a hard plastic base of minimum and maximum dimensions, foam of specific density and thickness, and no other internal components or features such as foils, insets, ridges, or heated toaster coils.
Yeah, so none of our Franken brooms from our Halloween podcast. But going back, the one other point they made with the single fabric was that the fabric they identified was woven in nature and had no external waterproofing or any kind of artificial texturing. So with these points, it makes sense. Logistically, I think it could prove to be a bit of a problem initially, in that it's just one fabric from one source. So it's kind of like, if you look at it, it's basically saying that instead of just having specs, they're having specs on what the fabric construction is and whatnot, but then it has to all come from the same supplier. So that could be putting a bit of a bottleneck on things. But that being said, that is the most extreme, I guess you could say, and probably the best way to ensure that there's uniformity across the board in regards to fabric, so that everyone is using the same fabrics on their brush head.
Don't forget, I mean, all the stones are the same material.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and they're matched and everything per sheet. So um, there's that. And then with the and then that also that a lot of what you saw. What's interesting about this is, as we saw during the moratoriums, initially when the hardline witch hunt, I mean, moratoriums were going on. Uh, something in my throat there. But when the hardline witch hunt did it again, uh, weird bug in my throat. It's making me say hardline witch hunt. But no, just kidding. Am I? When the initial moratoriums
Dun
were
dun
going on,
dun.
when the initial moratoriums were going on, first they talked about the specific material on the ice pad, and then they were talking about the plastic insert. But the, I guess you could say probably the two other um, big pads in use at the time. I mean, there are more than two, but the two other big issues saw were the EQ pad from Balance Plus, which has some foil under the fabric, and then the Norway pad from Goldline, which has some foam ridges under the fabric. And both of those, if I'm not mistaken, have an element of waterproofing to the fabric. So essentially, here, what's interesting is whereas the moratoriums before, the language was very, very specifically, impacting. I mean, it was impacting everyone theoretically, but really seemed to be impacting Hardline with their ice pad construction more so than the other manufacturers. Now this is rolling things back to pre EQ pad, because it was the EQ pad, then the Norway pad, then the ice pad. So those proprietary features of those pads are no longer going to be allowed to be used at these WCF events. So the foam ridges in the Norway pad, the foil and the EQ pad. So what's good about this is it's affecting uh, everyone equally, and again is not favoring one manufacturer or one type of product over another, which is good to see. Because I mean, like, we were joking about it, but it is true. I mean, why dance around the issue? It definitely seemed that when things were initially going on, that hardline was really being targeted, um, and their product was really being uh, focused on, I guess you could say, as the main offender. Um, so at times it seemed to almost be unfair. That's neither here nor there. What's done is done, but moving forward, it's good to see that they're not there's doesn't appear to be any kind of bias towards or against one manufacturer or another. Let's put it that way. So that's definitely a welcome thing to see here with this. Uh, the next point is that I see here that in regards to, so that's all in regards to the brush pads themselves, that in terms of the heads, three specific fabric type brush head constructions were tested and unanimously recommended. So essentially what they're saying there is that there's slight differences in the size and shape of the heads. So while the fabric and the brush heads have to be from a single source, or the fabric for the brushes has to be from a single source and supplier in the same fabric, they can be constructed differently. So you will presumably see the hard line shape and the high performance shape and whatnot all using this fabric. So you're not going to see just one construction of head size and shape for these. Dan, you want to take the next point?
I can go ahead, thank you. Sorry, didn't realize my thing was on mute again here.
It's all right.
Um, So yeah, point number five actually talks about the bags of the brooms, which is something that nobody considered. But the WCF has actually outlawed the bags that you plug in to keep your brooms warm to easily melt the ice. Similar to the Domino's heat wave bag, which you can see here
Dan,
on our video.
what are you reading?
Oh, you never know. But maybe I'm reading a Domino's menu, so I'm kind of hungry.
Big surprise.
All right, back to the WCF. Number five. Each player should have their own brush, and swapping of brushes between players should not be permitted.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I already said it, but this to me seemed to be a no-brainer in terms of curbing the effects of directional sweeping because big part of it as the season went on people discovered was the freshness or abrasiveness of a brush head. So even when they went to a rule limiting head changes and whatnot, players adapted to that rule by swapping brooms around so they'd be saving their fresh head for the shots where they would want to directional sweep. So with this, you could still possibly save it up, but you're not going to be able to swap brooms around to do so. Your broom is your broom for the game, the end. So this to me, out of all these points, that number five is my favorite thing to come out of it, honestly, because it makes perfect sense. It's easy to enforce, and honestly, I wish they would have enforced it sooner last season because it would have been quick and easy to implement. And again, I know they tried it at some of the slam events. They put some rules in place in regards to this, but yeah, this is a good one to see. So
So
number
fresh and
six,
I don't know if the audio is picking up.
Sir Lucius got Gator belts and patty melts and Monte Carlo.
All right. So fresh and so clean, clean. Phil doesn't know any of the bits that I'm doing, let alone I don't really know anything that I'm doing too. But hey, number six. Only one brush head should be allowed for use on each broom in each game unless replacement is approved by competition officials in case where environmental challenges produce less than ideal playing conditions.
so yeah, I mean, I believe if I remember correctly, they had already had rules in place somewhat to this effect about only one um, brush head per broom per game unless it became significantly degraded to the point where it's unusable. So this is again just another good one to go with number five that basically will cut down or prevent the abrasiveness of the fabric from becoming an issue, whereas you're not going to potentially have players using fresh pads for each shot in order to be able to directional sweep. And that the only time you're going to be allowed to change out in the middle of a game would be if you have particularly, we'll say, challenging ice where the heads are becoming either too worn to be used, or more likely in this case, since there's no waterproofing and it's a slightly different fabric, I'm going to guess probably waterlogged. If you have that kind of slushy ice, you get the frosty ice that tends to really hit the pads hard in regards to moisture. So pad brushes aren't nearly as effective when they're waterlogged. So I'm guessing that that's the kind of situation where you'd be seeing them allowing pad change during a game.
Although, if, as early in the season saw, if you have enough fog growing up on the ice, you can just duck underneath the fog to make a quick head brush change.
Yeah, no one will know.
Dun dun dun. All right, number seven. The only sweeping technique requiring enforcement should be the rule prohibiting depositing debris in the path of the stone or dumping.
Yeah, and this is already not allowed, and this is nothing new here. This was already prohibited, and basically what they're saying is, looking at it, um, this is with these materials. This is the only technique that would have any kind of impact potentially directionally on the stone would be dumping, and usually with dumping, that's more so to slow a stone down. So again, this is already not allowed, and they're just really the way I read this is they're just saying that out of everything, this is the only technique that that would still be effective to an extent where it's unacceptably effective, even with the approved fabric. So
Although I find it effective maybe about once a day, a little bit after I eat.
sometimes multiple times a day.
That's only if you eat Taco Bell. But hey, all right. So let's talk about the after discussion and deliberation. The recommendations for the sweeping summit were supported by two commissions and forwarded to the WCF board for consideration. Following several weeks of consideration and consultation. Wow, let me try that one more time. And
Consultation.
hey, reading live is not an easy thing to do with the world. Okay,
We need Ben Vereen to help you here, Dan.
well, it'd be better if Morgan Freeman was narrating all this.
See, that shows our age. As I go reading Rainbow, he goes Electric Company.
Reading Rainbow. All right, back to including curling equipment manufacturers, the WCF board also supported these recommendations in principle. Further discussions and ongoing and work continues to develop the detailed proposals which will be voted on at the WCF annual congress in Stockholm in September. Phil, translation.
Um, Basically, what they're saying there is that with the sweeping summit, the recommendations they came up with were pretty much supported by everybody. The commissions involved, the WCF board seemed to like it, curling equipment manufacturers. So, in principle, everyone's pretty much on board with these recommendations, but that um, the actual detailed proposals won't be ready until they have their annual Congress in September in Stockholm. But for now, that these recommendations are being met with approval.
So, do you think that these recommendations are going to go easier than the political conventions that are going to be going on here shortly?
Yeah, yeah.
Totally,
Well,
totally throwing him here for a loop.
yeah. Well, based on what I've seen, I think the conventions themselves will actually be kind of boring, just because it's pretty much set on both sides here in the U.S. Who the nominees are going to be, and there's really no mechanism other than basically like upheaval for either party to have a different nominee. So I think the conventions will actually go quite peaceably. To be perfectly honest, as a side note, I know polling and whatnot says otherwise. I have a feeling this election is going to have an incredibly low turnout, and I think that I think all the attention it's getting is actually having a backlash on people, and I think a lot of people are going to be apathetic and not care, which is sad and scary, and why we should talk about something else like curling. It's a little further down in the document, but a point I think is relevant with what they said there is that let's see. I'll scroll down to it here because they bring it up later, but it's relevant to bring up now. But for this, it's further down under approval of recommendations. Is that with the WCF Constitution, the member associations at a General Assembly are the ones who have the authority to make decision regarding the rules of curling, and that next General Assembly, as I said, isn't until September. As I mentioned earlier, with them releasing these results, now versus September, that gives time to act, and that's kind of what they're getting at here. Is that the time frame would not allow sufficient time for manufacturers to produce equipment complying with these recommendations prior to the start of the 2016-17 season, thereby impacting WCF championships and potentially other elite curling events. So again, they're talking about World Curling Tour stuff, Grand Slam, that sort of thing.
Windy City Open.
Yeah. Therefore, the WCF board has taken the extraordinary step of advising the member associations of their recommendations, their intended impacts, and the undesirable consequences of waiting until the General Assembly in Stockholm. So basically, what they're telling the member associations is, this is what we came up with, and this is what could happen if we don't implement these changes now ahead of the assembly and voting on it. So basically, last point here, after asking for and receiving no objections from any of the member associations to proceeding at this time, The board has taken the decision to proceed with establishing standards based on these recommendations so manufacturers can begin producing WCF approved equipment in time for next season. So, in a nutshell, as I said earlier, basically they went ahead and kind of went around the normal procedure, recognizing I guess, the extraordinary circumstances of the situation, and recognizing that waiting to act until September would prove to potentially be disastrous. So essentially, they got a verbal okay, so to speak, from all the member associations to go ahead and pretty much act as if these are the rules now, and then they'll be voted in September. So again, I know for some people who are, or I mean, who are big sticklers for procedure and whatnot, I know this has got to stick into people's craw, but given the
Mm,
circumstances, I think this is the right way to go because already, as was pointed out a lot during the last season, when a lot of this was brought up, it was already mid October. Curling season was well underway, and then we started moratoriums and whatnot, and manufacturers were left scrambling. So now at least they're given time to get a product out there. And since pretty much within 24 hours or so, all the big manufacturers, namely in this case, the ones most impacted, which would be Hardline, Goldline, and Balance Plus, they all had press releases out talking about how these recommendations would impact them and their products, and then what they were going to offer in regards to compliant materials and brush heads. So, I mean, obviously, before this was released on the 27th of June, they probably were given a bit of a heads up, I'm sure. But nevertheless, they acted very, very quickly. So, essentially, what I'm saying is that they achieved their results, their desired result of um, moving ahead with this to allow manufacturers to act in time for the season and keep it from becoming an issue of having recommendations in place, but nothing officially on the books.
so, in the grand scheme of life, how does this affect you and me and the armchair curler?
It doesn't. Um, there's some language in here in that. Um, let's see. Looking through it here, basically, the next couple points, because we were on equipment, they were kind of just rehashing what they said before. That essentially, equipment produced under those recommended standards shows that it has a reasonable impact. So essentially, what they're saying is you could probably still have some directional effect, but nothing to the extremes we saw the previous season. Um, and that's when used by elite athletes with a high fitness and skill level. And this equipment is specifically intended for use in WCF championships and events.
So that means from all of those 3 points that you just read, it means nothing to do with us, fitness and skill
Well,
level.
yeah, exactly. At least you and I. But they did say that it's likely that the standards will be adopted by other competitions contested by the same elite athletes. So what they're saying is they expect probably the World Curling Tour and the Grand Slam Series and whatnot, which falls in with the World Curling Tour, to fall in line with these recommendations. Same as probably like you would imagine Curling Canada will probably follow suit. So that'll impact the Canada Cup, Scotty's Briar. USCA will probably follow suit, impacting nationals and whatnot.
And strangely, the Scripps National Spelling Bee.
Yeah. Um, and then there is some more language in here about how it'll impact other curlers, but I'm just looking through it here. Basically, yeah, they kind of just rehash their thing about where they got the recommendations from, and that the fabrics tested and what the results were, and why they're using a single fabric, and that they want to continue to work with manufacturers to you know follow and understand the implications of the recommendations to create equipment for players at that level. Um,
Hey, and we
and
have,
then,
I'm about to say, we have some breaking news. I'm going to pull it on the screen right now. The yellow curling hat is currently sold out, but you can get the pink or the red right now by using the promo code NERD and going to curlinghats.com.
Curlinghats.com. Check them out and use promo code NERD at checkout. But here we go. Here's the language I was looking for. So they said, with that, the NRC, which is the scientific body involved with the testing here, is going to produce reports on the outcomes, and those reports, they said, expected the next month, so presumably sometime here in July. Um, those reports should help
And
organizers of other competitions and events, all the way from elite level tours to clubs, in choosing how to apply the WCF standards for brush heads to their events or leagues. And they just said, that being said, ensuring equipment used by curlers at every level of play provides appropriate effectiveness, enjoyment, and safety is important to the WCF. Therefore, based on the preliminary results from the sweeping summit, which are still to be confirmed by the NRC, the WCF has begun consulting with curling equipment manufacturers to determine what steps, if any, should be taken regarding curling equipment intended for recreational use. After the work of the NRC is completed and full test results are presented to the WCF board and members for consideration, a report will be made public. So,
that
to
means here at NerdCurl, once those reports come out, we will report on it in December.
yes, maybe January. But yeah, so to answer your question there, basically, right now it won't impact the recreational curler or even the competitive curler. Um, unless you're basically what they're talking about is these are for this. I hate the term elite, but it's the term they use, and so that's essentially, you're talking about people playing in events like U.S. National, the Scotties, the
Us.
Briar, the Grand Slam events.
Not us.
Not us.
Not us.
High profile, the big World Curling Tour events like the Stockholm Ladies Curling Cup and all those curling Champions Tour events. You see, I forget the name of it, but the uh, why is it Baden Masters, um, the all those curling Champions Tour events for men and women. You see in Europe, the events in Asia and whatnot. That's what they're talking about for now, are these top level players that are competing at a level where they could be competing at a world or even an Olympic event. And that for the time being, all the recommendations and everything aren't necessarily meant for the recreational or club level or even the other competitive levels, but they, for one, expect the other competitive levels to fall in line at some point, and that ultimately they will eventually be making recommendations for the recreational players, and there may be changes coming that'll impact recreational players. Of note is that I noticed with pretty much all the manufacturers with their press releases, uh, they had said that they're coming out with products for the so-called elite players and gave timetables for when those would be available, more or less. But then also, emphasized what would still be available of their product lines to recreational players and what, if any, different products would be available. Hardline's still going to be producing the regular ice pad as they have been for use for club players and recreational players. Goldline's still producing the Norway pad, as far as I know. Balance Plus still producing the EQ pad. So for the time being, other
3M.
than
I would say 3M still producing the green and yellow pad.
yep. So really, it shouldn't have that. Technically, it shouldn't have that much of an impact on the recreational curler, but the thing is, it will. I mean, there's going to be that one guy at a lot of clubs who's probably going to run around finger pointing. Had no problem last year, but now because someone said so, he's going to be trying to like rip people's EQ or Norway heads off or ice pads or what
That
have you.
guy.
So
That guy I'm
that,
pointing to right here.
if you're pointing at me, I always did that in jest. I didn't care, but I would go up to people and be like, "Oh, you can't use that broom head," just to screw with them. I wasn't serious. I didn't care. Um, I usually use that as a conversation starter to talk about curling because a lot of people I curl with love the sport, play the sport, but don't always keep up on all the ins and outs. So they'd be like, "What? What's going on? Broom, haha, broom gazi, what?"
I just found out about this last week. Maybe
Yep.
not, but not too far off.
As a side note, I did notice here there's a section on licensed manufacturers, and that they said in collaboration with curling equipment manufacturers, they've begun to develop a licensing arrangement for those manufacturers who wish to have their equipment approved for use at WCF championships and events. So essentially, the World Curling Federation is establishing a licensing program for approved equipment. I guess it'd be like, I don't know if anyone's a bowler, but a lot of times you'll notice with bowling balls that there are bowling balls that you can use that are not approved for the different sanctioned events. And there are bowling balls that are, and the ones that are usually stamped USBA or USBC approved. Same thing with golf clubs. You know, you have golf clubs available that I believe you can buy ones that aren't necessarily allowed to be used in PJ events. You have other ones. So really, point is the WCF is falling in line with other sports in terms of licensing and approving equipment.
Step it up, Libman. You can get
Yeah,
this bad boy approved.
yeah. The question I have is this going to be a revenue stream for the WCF? I'm not saying that that's why they're doing this, but it is kind of interesting that now they're talking about licensing. I assume that licensing is going to come with some money involved. So I,
That's
I
a
I'm
great
one.
way to become a sponsor of NerdCurl.
Yeah, but I do wonder if this is going to be something that, as an aside to all this, that they're going to uh, reap some financial benefits from all this with the licensing agreement. Be interesting to see.
All right, so that kind of gets us near the end. Let me read the closing paragraph on the recommendation, and I'm going to switch it to the screen here. So the single-minded focus of this group was to find a solution to the challenges faced by the sport over the past season, has made a significant contribution to ensuring the fundamental principles of curling as a sport which demands a high degree of athletic performance and mental skill are protected. So Phil, what do you want to say about that closing paragraph?
Uh,
Imagine.
Basically, they're saying that with the summit and with its goals and everything, is that ultimately what it was hoping to achieve is what they said they were hoping to achieve is that just to keep the focus of curling where people believe it belongs as a sport that requires a lot of athletic prowess and skill and keeps the focus on the shooter, not the sweeper in terms of making shots. I mean, obviously there's shots that you can't make without your sweepers, but essentially the majority of it for making or not making the shot should fall on whoever's throwing the shot. So basically, the way I read that is what they're saying is that their goal, their intent is to keep curling what it is and not have the sport significantly or fundamentally change from what we all know.
So who am I going to blame now every time I miss a shot?
Yourself,
Damn.
as you should be.
Wait, I can't swear. I'll get flagged on iTunes.
Yeah.
All right, so that kind of wraps it up here for the sweeping summit. Were there any last comments you wanted to make on it, Phil?
No, just that I'm interested to see. I know Hardline has been showing their compliant heads are out. I don't believe they're available. Like they're not up in their store, but I think you have to email them directly to order them. But they are available, and they have them out. I haven't seen anything just yet from Balance Plus or Gold Line, but I know
Mountain
they're
Town.
going to have stuff available. So I'm just interested to see, what the new material is, or it could be an old material that they've just approved. But I'm interested to see what this approved material is like and all about, and the head construction and how it holds up. Because I know the one thing that I've heard or read was that there might be some concerns in regards to this approved fabric with durability over the long term. I mean, that was one of the things. Now, granted, most of these top teams,
Granite.
uh, yeah, granted, but these top teams, these elite curlers were, changing pads every game, fresh Norway, EQ, ice pad, whatever, every game. But for a lot of recreational curlers, one of the benefits of all these different pads was their longevity. I mean, you didn't want to use the same pad all the time, but you could definitely get more out of it than with the older pads. So, and again, for the time being, they're still going to be sold and still allowed to be used, but it'll be interesting to see if ducks fall in a row and eventually everyone's using this new approved fabric. Then it could really impact the recreational or the club curler, in that even a mediocre sweeper who's not pressing that hard may find themselves changing pads more often. So
All
that impact has yet to be seen. I guess the only other thought is that, you know I understand why they're focusing on equipment. I think they, to be honest, and I have a feeling the NRC results may show this, that I think they may be downplaying the effectiveness of technique a little bit. Um, but I understand that, when you really look at it, it's not feasible to just police technique just because so much of it is subjective. I mean, if you're talking about angle, come up with a good way to determine whether or not someone's sweeping at an appropriate angle. I mean, wherever they set it at, how do you tell the difference? I mean, it could lead to some huge messes. Honestly, I wasn't watching curling, but at the time, but I've heard the stories of when they had the hog line judges and some of the arguments and situations that arose from that. So I imagine you could see something similar. So
so
I get why they're doing it, and I think in the long run, it's probably the best way to go in order to just keep things on an even keel and make everyone happy.
so on that note, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in 75 seconds, and here's a word from one of our sponsors.
Honey, where's the spatula?
Okay, kids, let's go.
There's just one place to go for all your spatula needs.
Spatula City! Spatula City!
A giant warehouse of spatulas for every occasion. Thousands to choose from in every shape, size, and color. And because we eliminate the middleman, we can sell all our spatulas factory direct to you. Where do you go when you want to buy name brand spatulas at a fraction of retail cost?
Spatula City! Spatula City!
And this weekend only, take advantage of our special liquidation sale. Buy 9 spatulas, get the 10th one for just 1 penny. Don't forget, they make great Christmas presents.
And what better way to say I love you than with the gift of a spatula?
Spatula City! Spatula City!
Hello, this is Cy Greenbloom, president of Spatula City. I like their spatulas so much, I bought the company.
Spatula City, 7 locations. We're in the yellow pages under spatulas.
My, where did you get that lovely spatula?
Spatula City, we sell spatulas, and that's all.
All right, now we are back. So, Phil, I mean, this is kind of the end of our first attempt at a live. Well, actually, it's our second attempt. Let me be totally honest. The first time we didn't get any sound going, and yeah, we probably got the same amount of viewers as we did last time.
Kind of reminds me of when I went through my interview with Haji, and it didn't record and we had to do it again later.
Yeah,
I think we got a track record for first time we try something, having to do it twice.
but hopefully, this brings up some future ideas. We'll actually be able to, you know, have some footage in from some different events and things of that nature, all under the fair use guidelines.
Yes, that's the important part. And who knows? I mean, hopefully you guys. I know all 3 of you who listen to us. Uh, hopefully those of you who enjoy the audio podcast also enjoy the video, and maybe we get some new followers with this. Maybe this is what people prefer, um, the video as well as the audio.
Yeah.
And if you are listening to the audio, definitely take a look at the video and look at our ugly mugs. Um, and check us out on Facebook to see what this is all about. But this is something that,
It's the
um,
wave of the future.
yep, got to get ahead of things.
Exactly. So if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me with. Whoops, I got to point the other way. All right, there we go. There's my Twitter handle at DTGoalie30. And Phil, let's talk of yours.
I think I'm pointing at it right. It's at.
Now, point to your 9 o'clock. It's on the side now.
Hold on, I'm trying to visualize my. Oh yeah, so
Point toward the back. There you go. You got it right there.
at Phil underscore Darren DARIN on Twitter.
And now just to screw everything up, now our Twitter handles are down here at the bottom.
And of course, give us a follow at NerdCurl. And if you're watching this, you probably already checked us out on Facebook, but check us out at facebook.com/NerdCurl.
We have quite a few Twitter followers, and go figure, we have like 6 Facebook followers. It's like the reverse of everything known in mankind. And thanks. You also make sure you check us out on iTunes. Go and hit that subscribe button. You won't be able to see our beautiful faces, and that's probably preferred by most of you. So you can follow us on iTunes. We're actually going to post the podcast on there here shortly. So that'll be probably in the next hour or so.
Yeah, you can just hear our beautiful voices.
And hopefully the Spatula City commercial came through.
Yeah, and make sure to tell a friend. We appreciate the support, and we could use the listeners.
And don't forget to check out curlinghats.com because we don't know how to end. Curlinghats.com, promo code NERD.
All right, let's wrap it up. Thanks as always for checking us out. As I said on my preview show, we'll catch you next time.
And Phil, if you can stall for another like 30 seconds, as I'm actually trying to go hit the button to cancel the live stream because I forgot about that.
Listeners.
All right, so here we
don't
go.
forget to check out
Bye now. Because we don't know how to end. Curling. All right, stop streaming. Stop streaming. All right, wasn't horrible.
That went pretty well.
It did. And what is that? I'm waiting for the. All right, we just ended. Greg Stewart and one other person gave us a thumbs up.
Well, I saw that Greg was watching, so that's good. You're not going to believe this. So I went to my first board meeting